Humanity often pays a high price for progress and understanding, like many famous psychological experiments. Although some well-known psychological experiments temporarily depress the test subjects, other experiments cause lifelong psychological distress to the participants. In either case, it is easy to ask the question, how far is too far if the result means a better understanding of the human mind and behavior? There are experiments involving children, animals, and test subjects who do not know they are part of the experiments. In today's video, we are going to cover the 10 most unethical experiments in psychology. Before we get into it, you might need a moment to prepare yourself. You know the drill, like, subscribe, and share. Okay, are you ready? Let's go! Number 1. Operation Midnight Climax. In the 1950s, the CIA sponsored a mind control research project called Operation Midnight Climax. The purpose of the operation was to study the effects of LSD on people, which is a drug that hallucinates people. Effects typically include altered thoughts, feelings, and awareness of one's surrounding. Non-consenting individuals in San Francisco and New York were lured to the safe house by paid prostitutes, where they would slip LSD, then monitored from behind one-way glass. Over the next decade, Operation Midnight Climax provided extensive knowledge on topics such as mind-altering drugs, surveillance technology, and even sexual blackmail. Luckily, Operation Midnight Climax was shut down in 1965. Number 2. The Monster Study. In 1939, 22 orphans living in Davenport, Iowa became the test subjects of two researchers, Wendell Johnson and Mary Tudor, from the University of Iowa. The children are divided into two groups. A group of members received active speech therapy and received consistent praise for their fluency. The other group received negative speech therapy, including being belittled for any speech defects that happened to occur. Finally, the second group of children who spoke normally before the experiment developed speech problems, and they reportedly retained these problems throughout their lives. For some reason, Johnson and Tudor never published their research results. Number 3. Stanford Prison Experiment. One of the most famous experiments in history was conducted in August 1971. The purpose of this experiment is to study the cause of conflicts between prisoners and guards. 24 male students were randomly assigned to the roles of guards or prisoners, and based on their roles, they were set up in a specially designed model prison on the basement level of the psychology building on the Stanford University campus. It quickly showed that those who had served as guards were taking their job too seriously. They began to enforce harsh measures and subjected their prisoners to various degrees of psychological torture. If this is surprising, then what's even more surprising is that many of the prisoners in the experiment just simply accepted the abuse. The authoritarian measures adopted by the guards became too extreme, forcing the experiment to stop after just 6 days. Number 4. Facial Expression Experiment. In 1924, Carney Landis, a psychologist at the University of Minnesota, began a study on common facial expressions. Specifically, he wanted to know whether everyone's expression of happiness, shock, and disgust were the same. To experiment, Landis recruited several student volunteers and then painted black lines on their facial muscle. He then exposed each participant to various stimuli to photograph their reactions. This included pornography, ammonia, reptiles, and decapitating rats. 1/3 of the participants were willing to behead the rats when they were told, even though they did not know how to do this kind of thing humanly. For those who hesitated to kill rats, Landis beheaded the rats for them. Number 5. Little Albert. Those who study psychology may already know the name of John Watson. Nope, not the one in Sherlock Holmes. This is the guy. Watson is known as the father of behaviorism, and often uses orphans in his various experiments. In a well-known and particular unethical experiment, Watson used a 9-month-old orphan named Albert. Initially, little Albert was exposed to all kinds of sights and sounds, including rabbits, monkeys, burning newspapers, and various masks. In the second phase of the experiment, Watson introduced little Albert to the rats. Like everything else, little Albert did not show any fear of rats. Not until whenever he touched the animals, Watson started making a loud noise with an iron rod. Unsurprisingly, the appearance of the rat started to scare Albert. Not long after that, Albert started to express fear towards anything fluffy or white, and finally proved Watson's hypothesis that fear can be conditioned. Number 6. Bobo doll experiment. In another Stanford experiment in the 1960s, psychologist Albert Bandura initiated an experiment designed to study how children learn behavior. Bandura's experiment consisted of 72 children and a large inflatable doll named Bobo. Bandura has a certain percentage of young test subjects watch an adult physically and verbally abuse Bobo, and then place each child alone in a room with the doll. Perhaps not surprisingly, a large number of children have also begun to abuse Bobo, many of whom are very violent. Bandura repeated the experiment twice and received the same results each time. Number 7. The Pit of Despair. Harry Harlow is the psychologist behind the Pit of Despair, an experiment that uses monkeys to learn about clinical depression. Harlow collected a group of monkeys between 3 months to 3 years old. Harlow knows that juvenile monkeys spend more time with their mothers than most mammals. So, Harlow isolated his young test subjects in a small and isolated room. Every monkey in Harlow's experiment had already established contact with his mother, so the monkey was extremely depressed. After a short time, the monkeys stopped playing and interacting, and 2 of them even refused to eat and starved to death. Harlow's experiment was widely condemned as cruel and unnecessary, and most people consider the result to be common sense. Number 8. The bystander effect. In 1968, psychologists Pete Blatane and John Daly became interested in the idea of the bystander effect. That is, when witnesses are in a large group of people, they do not take action to help someone. Their interest came from the murder of Kitty Genovese, a young woman who was stabbed to death in front of multiple witnesses, and no one intervened to save her life. At first, the psychologist's experiment was relatively harmless, but soon, they became more unethical. In one experiment, the test subject and an actor was placed in a room, and then let the actor pretend to have a seizure. The result of the experiment was quite sad. Only a few people willing to step forward and help when a group of subjects witnesses a seizure. However, the subjects only step up faster when they are alone with the actor in the room. Number 9. Learned helplessness experiment. In 1965, Martin Seligman conducted unethical experiments on dogs. First, Seligman experiments involving ringing a bell and then shaking the dog. After several pairings, the dog reacted as soon as it heard the bell sound, as if it had been shocked. In the second part, Seligman put the dog in a box separated by a low fence in the middle. Then he delivered a painful electric shock and allowing the dog to jump over the obstacle and escape. Every dog will find out that if they jump to the other side of the box, they can avoid the pain of electric shock. However, unexpectedly, this dog simply lay down. The hypothesis is that when the dog learned from the first part of the experiment that they cannot take any measures to avoid electric shocks, they abandoned their hope in the second part of the experiment. To prove this hypothesis, the experimenters found a new group of dogs and found that dogs with no history of the experiments would simply cross the fence. This situation is described as learned helplessness because history tells them that they are helpless, and because of that, no matter humans or animals will not try to get rid of the negative situation. Number 10. Robbers Cave Experiment. Loyalty is a powerful motivation, and the Robbers Cave Experiment proved that. Psychologist Muzaffar Sharif organized the experiment at a 3-week summer camp in Robber Cave State Park in Oklahoma. Sharif divided the campers, all boys aged 11 and 12, into 2 groups. At first, neither of them knew the other group's existence. After a few days of bonding, the 2 groups were allowed to compete with each other in various games. The games were already full of tension, but when Sharif manipulated the result of the game, making the final score of the game was always very close, the situation became more intense. In the final stage of the experiment, Sheriff asked two groups of boys to work together to achieve a common goal, but prejudice and tension were easily built up between boys from two different groups. Well, that's all the top 10 unethical psychology experiments. If you like the video, you know the drill, and don't forget to check out some of our interesting videos. See you next time!